National 5 historians, and welcome to lesson 2 in our Hitler and Nazi Germany topic and our last topic for National 5 history. Can you please make sure that you are making notes from the first lesson and this lesson, and that you've got them someplace really accessible? Do it in your new jotter if you were given one, or do it on a new notebook or somewhere online, Word document on your phone, somewhere you can find them. Okay, so new heading for this lesson is Abdication and Armistice. A couple of learning intentions basically for this, just one real key sort of thing, is to explain why the Kaiser abdicated, and we're going to practice a how fully question as well with this. So there's a couple of reasons for this. Like the last lesson, the plan's going to be to make either a grid or a mind map, or even just headings with some information and some key detail that we're going to look at for the reasons why the Kaiser abdicated. But before that, we're going to have a think about the Armistice Agreement. So recap wise, we know that the British were blockading the German ports and the harbours, and it was leading to serious economic issues within Germany. The people were starving, sickness in the form of Spanish flu was spreading throughout Germany, as well as malnutrition and other diseases and things that come along with that. There were stories being spread of how horrible the trenches actually were that were really shocking for the German people, who were obviously not aware of that. They were demanding that the war ended and that they got their loved ones home again. They'd been told they were winning all of these battles, and now it was come to light that they obviously weren't, and they wanted these people back. There's not enough coal for heating or for lighting within Germany, which means that people feel really like they're being ignored and mistreated, and that this whole thing that they were fighting for has actually led to more of an issue within Germany than it was providing sort of the glory that they'd been promised. So they want this to end. Really good source and an excellent quote from this time from a German civilian actually recalling the conditions in Germany, said, "One of the most terrible of our many sufferings was having to sit in the dark. It became dark at 4, it was not light until 8, even the children could not be made to sleep all of that time. When they had gone to bed, we were left shivering with the chill which comes from semi-starvation, and which no amount of extra clothes seems to relieve." So this kind of shows you the whole idea of them not having enough fuel for even light or heat, but also then not enough food, so starvation and malnutrition happening as well. The situation did then get worse for Germany as time kind of went on, and when that happened, the people started to demand the country make peace immediately. So we saw the kind of the rioting and things, and the revolutionary kind of mutiny and Kiel happening. They demanded that the Reichstag, the parliament, the German parliament, be actually given more power and more authority to make decisions. The politicians started to openly talk about holding a revolution because they felt that the war needed to end, and no one was listening to them about it. The Kaiser wasn't prepared to do that, so they had to take power into their own hands to save the country, more or less. The Kaiser was still not willing to make any changes at this point, even when his politicians were openly talking about revolting against him. So the military leaders at this point in time knew that as long as the Kaiser ruled, the Allies, especially Britain and France, would want to punish Germany for their role in the war. They hoped that if they changed the government to a more democratic system and got rid of the Kaiser, then the Allies would maybe not be quite so hard on Germany, because they were proving that they'd be able to actually adapt and change. The Reichstag was given more power. The Kaiser did approve that, and a chancellor was appointed. The first chancellor was called Prince Max of Baden. He was appointed to try and deal with it, and he had one task: arrange a peace agreement of some sort. But the question was, how is he going to go about ending this war? So the peace agreement itself, the German people hoped that it would be based on what had been presented to them previously during the war, a document called President Wilson's 14 Points for Peace, which had been created by the US President Woodrow Wilson at this point in time, and outlined 14 kind of clear things that Germany and the Allies would do to create a sort of a peace agreement. Now, when this had been given, these 14 points, it had been rejected by Germany because they were very sure they could still win the war at that point in time, and they weren't even willing to entertain it. So basically what they now hoped was that that offer of peace in that same format would still be on the table and available to them in this way if they actually would now agree to it. So Prince Max sets up a letter to President Wilson, and in it he says the German government accepts as a basis for the peace negotiation, so he's going to negotiate this, the programme laid down by the President of the USA in January 1918. So that was a couple of months ago. We didn't want it then, but we do want it now. To avoid further bloodshed, the German government requests that the President to bring about the immediate conclusion of an armistice by land, by sea and in the air. Basically, stop all the blockade, stop all the fighting, and we'll negotiate. So the response from the US was not particularly in favour of this. They rejected it, and the war continued. So by October 1918, the attitudes had really hardened against Germany. The fact that they hadn't accepted the peace negotiation format when it had been originally presented was definitely counting against them. The Allies very much wanted to punish Germany, and they made it really clear that there would be no peace as long as the Kaiser actually still ruled Germany. They had to get rid of him. That was the first thing, before they would even negotiate. No ceasefire, no armistice, as long as the Kaiser was still there. So he had tried to make some changes, Wilhelm II, pictured here in all of his finery. He had passed some power to the German Reichstag, but this basically failed to stop the protests. So eventually the commander of the German army had said to him on the 9th of November, if you do not abdicate, the best thing for you to do instead is to shoot yourself. This is kind of the idea that they were going with, that they had to get rid of him, no matter how he did it. Abdication was the way forward, preferably, but if it meant he had to kill himself or they had to kill him, they were almost kind of hinting that they were willing to do this, because they couldn't enter negotiation until that was dealt with. So because law and order was starting to collapse in Germany, and he knew that these people would possibly come out against him quite shortly, he was finally persuaded. He abdicated and he ran off to Holland for political asylum. Britain and France were not particularly happy about that. They thought he'd escaped justice, but there wasn't very much more that they could actually do. So ultimately then, an abdication has to happen and an armistice is actually made. But the question that we're asking is why? Why did the Kaiser ultimately decide to abdicate? And there's kind of 7 main reasons that we're looking at with this. He was blamed for the hardship of World War I. He was blamed for losing the war and the high casualty rate that had come with that. Demonstrations and riots breaking out were calling for vengeance, so that was a major issue. Obviously, politicians were worried there would be a communist revolution, and the people really wanted a democracy. They were starting to demand it. The Allies had said that he was an obstacle to peace, and it was a condition of ceasefire that he was gone. And then finally, they were promised fair treatment in the negotiations if they did get rid of him. So what we're going to do with this next part of the PowerPoint is we're going to look at each of these things in a wee bit in more detail. It's probably a good idea if you put that heading, why did the Kaiser abdicate, and you maybe write down the 7 kind of things that we're looking at, and we're going to have a wee bit more detail in the next couple of slides. You can choose how you do this. If you want to do it as a mind map and then add some info about it under each bit, that's fine. If you want to do it as I've done it, like in wee sort of grids, you can do it that way. If you want to do it as a mind map in another way, that's fine. If you want to do it just as kind of key headings, I would write each of these sentences down, and then maybe in a different colour pen you could put your wee bit of extra information that you'd be using to develop the point. So we know that in 1914 he was a popular king and leader. The German public has supported him going into war, but by 1918 everything he's promised is not actually appearing, so they would basically have to get rid of him. The Kaiser, who said they'd be home before the leaves fall, was actually not acting like the Kaiser they knew and loved, so it was time for him to go. So we're going to add these bits of detail. Okay, so point number 1, the people began to blame the Kaiser for making their life so hard during the war, with the lack of food, outbreak of disease, lack of fuel to heat their homes, and that's our added point for point 1. So add that into your point 1 section. For point 2, they also held him responsible for losing the war and heavy casualty rates with 2 million people dead at this point, so again, add that in. And in response to protests occurring across the majority of cities, Berlin examples. This really worried the politicians that civil war was about to break out due to the call for vengeance for their losses, and again Russia had shown that revolution was possible, so they were really concerned about that. So that would be point 3. So in your mind map, under your headings, in your grid, whatever you've decided to do, just put down the wee bit of extra detailed sentence underneath each one for 1 to 3. Stop the video if you need to, and then come back for the next couple. Okay, so point number 4, we've talked about this calling for a democracy. They were calling for a new political system, demanding more political rights, which we can see here. Some politicians were even really frightened that a communist revolution like had happened in Russia was going to happen. At some protests there were people waving red flags, which was the sign of revolution, so that was a major issue. In addition, the Allies had directly stated the Kaiser was an obstacle to peace and a condition of the ceasefire. And then finally, the Allies promised fair treatment for Germany if the Kaiser was actually forced to abdicate, and they did this first of all. So again, add some detail to your mind map or to your grid or your list, whatever you're done with this, about reasons for the Kaiser's abdication, and then move on to the next slide. So the Kaiser abdicates, and then on the 11th of November at 11 AM 1918, the armistice was finally declared and the guns went silent. Again, Remembrance Day, which is why we remember it for the armistice at this point. Across Germany, arguments and protests then took place about what the country's future would actually look like. Some people wanted a communist, sort of Soviet type of government. A lot of people were opposing this. They wanted change, but not quite as extreme as that. They just wanted something different. No one was really exactly sure what that was going to look like. Eventually, a civilian government, which was led by this man, Friedrich Eber, was formed. He opposed a communist takeover and eventually had reached secret deals with the German military to stop these kind of communist overthrows that we're going to look at of the new government. His government was called the Provisional Government. It was only supposed to be temporary, but it was the foundation of what would become known as the Weimar Republic. Now, in the first few months of its existence, it had nothing but problems. It was really a major issue. Ebert's government had challenges from the left-wing groups, and they tried to overthrow them quite a number of times. They were defeated, and eventually what was allowed to happen was a new political system in Germany. The Weimar Constitution and the Weimar Republic would be born. But we're going to look at that in more detail in the next lesson. So, assignment for this lesson is this how fully question. Why did the Kaiser abdicate? Again, how fully questions, remember you're using aid. You've got to make your judgment or your answer by saying quite fully, using the question but not totally. You're then looking for things that the source says. Try and get 3. Okay, and remember you are taking the quote and then explaining the quote, and then you're looking for 3 things that the source doesn't say. And remember, it's reasons that you're looking for if it's an explain. So explain the reasons why the Kaiser abdicated. Would be looking for a wee bit more detail than just description points in your recall. So we're looking for reasons from the source, and you're looking for explain points in your recall, that you're trying to make sure it's reasons that you're giving and not just facts. So complete the how fully question. Again, use your skills guides to help you if you're not sure. Use the videos if you're not sure, and ask if you're not sure about how to do this, and upload it to your assignment tab in the team. Any questions or things that you need help with, don't hesitate to email or put a message in the team or ask your teacher for help, and we'll get back to you.